Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017. Somebody sent some Dramamine to Too Tall Jim Comey, the FBI director, who says he's mildly nauseous over being accused of influencing last year's presidential election. And just before the end of this podcast, satirist and political commentator Will Durst will weigh in on Trump's first 100 days. But James Comey went to Capitol Hill today to face the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it's fair to say that members of both parties asked him some tough questions. But he didn't really answer any tough questions. He dodged most of them, saying, "Oh, gosh, Senator, I'd love to answer that, but I can't do it in a public session." And he dodged questions about the investigation of Trump-Russia. But what was really clear from the grilling, and I credit some of the senators, including Al Franken, Pat Leahy, Dianne Feinstein, Mazie Hirono, and Coons. I can't remember Coons' first name, senator from Delaware, Chris Coons. And, they were polite but pressing him and saying, look, there's a double standard. You told us in July that you weren't going to press charges against Hillary Clinton, and then late in October you sent this letter saying that you'd reopened it because of the Anthony Weiner laptop, and we'll get into details about that in just a second. But the clear double standard that he felt compelled, that he had no choice but to tell the Congress and in turn the American people that they had essentially reopened the Clinton email investigation. Well, that really falls flat when you hear him say that, oh, the Trump-Russia investigation, that's counterintelligence. We never comment on stuff like that. And he tries to say that the Clinton case was so extraordinary that he had no choice. He had this kind of Monty Hall door number 1 and door number 2, and he said there were only 2 doors. It was concealment or disclosure. And, of course, the third door, as I think it was Coons who pointed out, was that he could have disclosed both investigations and given American voters at least some sense of what was going on. And he said, well, look, we gave you the statement from the NSA and the CIA going back to October 6th. He said that he had wanted to alert people with some sort of an op-ed column back in August, but that was vetoed by the Obama team. And so I have to say that what Comey tells us is so unsatisfying. And he was defensive, at times raising his voice, racing to jam in his talking points. And as you know, I offer zero credibility to James Comey. And it's not just about Trump-Russia. It's not just about his handling of the Clinton emails. He presides over a rogue agency that routinely frames people for so-called domestic terrorism crimes. And last week we brought you 2 powerful interviews with Trevor Aronson and another reporter, Bo Hodai, about the abuse of the suspects in these domestic terrorism cases. Hodai told us about this kid from Arizona with a 6th grader mentality, was groomed from the age of 14 by the FBI as an informant, and then he became a suspect. He's now serving 8 years in a lockup in Texas. In Arizona. And so none of those questions came up, of course. Nobody asks the things that I think are essential to evaluating the tenure of Jim Comey as FBI director. So he claimed to be mildly nauseous over the idea that his pronouncements about Clinton, the investigation being on again, off again, that they swayed the election. And he just keeps telling us that he had no other option. Failing to inform Congress, he said, would have required an act of concealment. Well, he conceals shit all day long. He says, concealment, in my view, would have been catastrophic, and he knew that the decision would be disastrous for him personally. Really, Jim. So we know that more will be explained behind closed doors in a classified setting, but this is not democracy. when we have so many secrets and secrets about secrets. And we are likely not to learn the outcome of this. And it's interesting because one of the questions I think that came from Senator Leahy is that Comey, as the number 2 in the Justice Department under John Ashcroft during the Bush administration, he was the one who selected Pat Fitzgerald as the special prosecutor in the Valerie Plame leak case that led to Dick Cheney's office and the conviction of Scooter Libby. But he really didn't offer much comment on whether we need an independent counsel or a special prosecutor to investigate the Trump-Russia case. And he says, you won't hear another peep about that one until we're done. And I don't know what'll be said when we're done, but that's the way we handled the Clinton investigation as well. This is bullshit. Now, last night, apparently in reaction to the recent comments from Hillary Clinton in her Christiane Amanpour conversation on Monday, Trump tweeted saying that Comey was the best thing that ever happened to Hillary Clinton in that he gave her a free pass for many bad deeds. Now, this is juvenile behavior on the part of Trump. He really should not be inserting himself in these issues at all. And it shows that, I believe, he is trying to cover up his own vulnerabilities. And why he hasn't sacked Jim Comey already is just a reasonable question. Also, Comey was directly asked if he had leaked anything ever, and he said no. Had he authorized others to leak on his behalf? He said no. And I don't believe that. I believe he has leaked with impunity. He also said that he's been interviewed by the Justice Department's Inspector General as part of an internal investigation into how the FBI handled the Clinton case. He says, I want that inspection. I want my story told. If I did something wrong, I want to hear that. Yeah, sure you do, Jim. Sure. Lindsey Graham asked Comey what threat Russia posed to future U.S. elections. In my view, the greatest threat of any nation on earth, given their intention and their capability. And this is, for me, one of the stunning inconsistencies. What is so irrational? Comey, so many others, flatly claim that Russia tried to tip the election to Trump. Trump won the election. Why don't they have any sense of outrage and enunciate that this is an illegitimate president if their premise is correct? Instead, they want to talk about not letting it happen again. And Comey even offered some comments saying, well, he's kind of waiting for guidance from the Trump administration to see how they want to handle certain FBI processes and policies. And then he took a swipe at WikiLeaks. To my mind, it crosses a line when it moves from trying to educate the public, that's how he said it, and instead becomes about intelligence porn, quite frankly. A huge portion of WikiLeaks' activities has nothing to do with legitimate news activity, but is simply about releasing classified information to damage the United States of America. Now, I understand he resents WikiLeaks because he sits on piles and piles of secrets, many of which are secret just to prevent embarrassment for wrongdoing and misfeasance and malfeasance by the people who work for Jim Comey. And it's inconvenient when WikiLeaks reveals certain things. But to trash it as intelligence porn, that was a talking point that was fed to him before he gave this testimony. That was a soundbite that was pre-cut. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah, it's intelligence porn. Well, we still have a stellar record for the information released by WikiLeaks. Nothing has been found to be falsified or, ginned up. But, it is embarrassing to these people, and they haven't found a way to silence WikiLeaks and lock up Julian Assange. And you can imagine that Jim Comey will be happy to team up with Jeffrey Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions to find some extra-legal maneuver to entrap Julian Assange and attempt to shut down WikiLeaks. The NSA released a report as required by the USA Freedom Act that was passed 2 years ago, and we were told it was going to sharply limit domestic surveillance, including metadata collection of your phone records. So the first report has been issued, and the NSA says that they've cut way back. Because a few years ago they were collecting billions of phone records every year. And now, in the last year, in 2016, they only collected 151 million records, and they said that they used this system of the telephone metadata collection on a mere 42 terrorism suspects in 2016. You believe that? I have a very hard time believing it. They also tell us that the use of the surveillance data from phone records was only used once in an ordinary criminal case last year. All the other cases were foreign intelligence. And, they're claiming, look how we have reformed. But I find this article, which is published in today's New York Times, a little bit confusing, because the report came from the NSA, and yet the New York Times news story about it then trundles over into the area of the FBI's domestic surveillance of, for example, telephones. The Times writes, the government's use of two other surveillance-related powers has dropped. One was its use of pen-registered trap-and-trace orders to collect metadata about particular targets' communications. The government obtained court orders for 456 targets in 2015, but only 41 in 2016. Now, from what I've been able to gather, the use of the ancient pen-registered trap-and-trace orders is related to the modern-day use of Stingray, the dragnet collection system that, simulates a local cell phone tower, requires all phones in range to check in with it, and then it can monitor all of those phones. Some Stingray systems can access the phones themselves, collect the user data, including contact lists, your phone calls, your voicemails, your emails, your text messages. And so I don't understand how this NSA report somehow reflects the domestic use of pen-registered trap-and-trace orders. And I wish I had an easy way to answer that, but so far I don't. Now, this report also says that the use of national security letters, which I believe is exclusive to the FBI, also decreased by about half. There were almost 50,000 requests in 2015, and we're told just about half of that in 2016. I still think that there is widespread abuse of national security letters, which essentially are warrants that don't require a legal order from a court. Meanwhile, House Democrats, 13 of them, have written a letter to Jeffrey Beauregard, Jim Crow Sessions, asking for details on the Justice Department's policies for surveillance of social media and social media data. And I think this is certainly a welcome development. The letter focuses in part on data tools that law enforcement has used to find information, among metadata from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Last October, the ACLU of California reported law enforcement agencies were using a social media monitoring service provided by the developer GeoFedia to view data that might otherwise require a warrant. The government didn't stop that. The companies stopped feeding information to GeoFedia. So they're asking for answers to 11 questions that focus on the use of surveillance and, in particular, of our social media activities. And I welcome that. I don't expect to get any better answers than we got from Jim Comey on the double standards for his investigations of presidential candidates. And let me just add, while I'm, slamming Comey here, I haven't changed my position at all. Hillary Clinton, I believe, is suffering from these self-inflicted wounds because she tried to hide her emails. She tried to make it difficult for the public to ever get access to them. And it was Jason Leopold's lawsuits that forced the disclosure of her emails prior to the election. And so I hope I'm not confusing you or whiplashing you too much. But I do believe that James Comey's public comments about the Clinton investigation were inappropriate, both the exoneration in July and then the reopening and reclosing of the case in October and November. I don't know if you've seen the clip yet, but Monday night's Late Show on CBS was a zinger. Stephen Colbert went after Trump with all barrels blazing, and a lot of it's pretty funny. Some of it was pretty mean-spirited in reaction to Trump's mean-spirited comments about the CBS Sunday show Disgrace the Nation. Its real name is Face the Nation. But Colbert, in one of his jokes, said that, well, let me read the string of them for you here so you can get them in context a little bit. He said, "I love your presidency. I call it Disgrace the Nation. Sir, you attract more skinheads than free Rogaine. You have more people marching against you than cancer. You talk like a sign language gorilla who got hit in the head. In fact, the only thing your mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's cock holster." Now, the word cock was bleeped by the CBS censors, but I actually thought he had said dick. But it was pretty clear that this was a reference to blowjobs, to oral sex. And Trump supporters are outraged. They're demanding that CBS fire Stephen Colbert. And what is really weird is they're saying that the jokes are homophobic. When was the last time Trump Republicans came to the rescue of embattled gay people in this country? So I don't know if Colbert will get fired. I imagine not. The notoriety has helped his ratings, and CBS is a different company than it was when I worked there 30 years ago, when you couldn't get away with anything like that. The lawyers would shut you down faster than they could put in a call to New York City and get you fired. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the PBC podcast with your subscriptions. And there are people like Benny Alto up in Oregon, Patrick Garay, Steve Wazensky, and Craig Baylog. I appreciate your support, and I thank you for sending me cash every month. It helps pay the bills here. I don't make a lot of money doing this podcast, maybe a little more than minimum wage, but probably not much. And I appreciate your support. So if you're not a subscriber right now, come on, get on it. Come over to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and in minutes you can choose your level of support, and you will have my ongoing gratitude. I was just talking about Stephen Colbert. The other viral late show video that is circulating is Jimmy Kimmel's very heartfelt commentary about the birth of his son, Billy, on my birthday, April 21st. And Billy, they discovered a couple of days after his birth, has some congenital heart defects, and Billy's going to be okay. They had some quick surgery. There'll be another operation. But his story was reduced to, my son now has pre-existing conditions. And Jimmy Kimmel can afford to buy insurance for his son, but many people whose kids are born this way wouldn't have that option. And it really did provide an emotional counterbalance to the wrecking efforts the Republicans continue against Obamacare and the noises that they're making about protecting people from being denied insurance coverage due to pre-existing conditions. And the Republicans are full of shit about this. Fred Upton of Michigan, who just yesterday said that he couldn't vote for the current package because of the confusing language that would allow states to opt out of medical standards and basically opt out of the ban on denying coverage due to pre-existing conditions. and it's been papered over with a promise from Trump of $8 billion in additional funds for high-risk insurance pools. But nobody knows how much demand there would be for this. And nobody knows the actual cost that the insurance company would charge a person with pre-existing conditions. And nobody knows if that charge would be covered by the state's share of this pool for high risk. This is just crazy. And the Republicans seem to believe that they can just say stuff and submit a bill that is very different from what they say, and that they will be able to repeal Obamacare and replace it with coverage that is barely worth calling health insurance, and to leave people to have to navigate the system. They're going to be denied coverage, then they've got to apply to a high-risk pool, and they're competing with other people with pre-existing conditions, some of whom may be extremely sick. So the Republicans are racing to get this passed, and they need to do it by tomorrow because there's an 11-day break for the Congress coming up. And as time goes by, the Republicans are going to be more and more stuck with the current system of the Affordable Care Act because there isn't time for insurance companies to plan for 2018 without knowing how Congress is going to act. So this is throwing the insurance markets into chaos. And here's an example. Yesterday, a California company that's been in business for decades, Molina Healthcare, had a boardroom coup. And the top two officials, brothers Dr. J. Mario Molina and financial officer John Molina, remain on the board, but they were sacked from their positions as CEO and Chief Financial Officer, respectively. And this is because Mario Molina has been one of the few insurance executives who has supported Obamacare, who has participated in the California exchange. And there are about 1 million people who get coverage through the exchange, and Molina Healthcare also covers 4 million people nationwide, most of whom are on Medicaid. And this is seen as an effort by the other people who own a stake in the company to sell it to a bigger insurer. And part of it, I believe, is the uncertainty of the marketplace as the Republicans try to get Obamacare to self-destruct so that the crap that they propose to replace it with is somehow seen as adequate or an improvement. It's just bizarre. Today, Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the West Bank Palestinians, made it to the White House, had lunch with the Donald, and Trump made noises. There can be no lasting peace unless the Palestinian leaders speak in a unified voice, renounce violence and hate. He says, I'm committed to working with Israel and Palestinians to reach an agreement, but any agreement cannot be imposed by the U.S. or any other nation. The Palestinians and Israelis must work together to reach an agreement that allows both peoples to live, worship, and thrive and prosper in peace. Now, what that means is that the Palestinians have to submit to the outsized, arrogant demands of the Israelis. And I don't see any description in this news account of the meeting between Trump and Abbas about Jared Kushner being present. He's been appointed by Trump to fix the problems in the Middle East, even though Jared is a deep supporter of the illegal settlements on Palestinian land. Hardly an unbiased arbiter. And where was Ivanka? She usually shows up for these meetings with foreign heads of state to try to improve her position for future business deals. Trump has told Dreamers that they can rest easy, right? But new details show that the deportation of so-called Dreamers who registered under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, 25% increase in deportations this year over the first 3 months of last year. Now, the DACA program has always been, I think, problematic because we have Dreamers who have registered under Obama facing a very uncertain future under Trump. And don't believe that every dreamer was protected by Obama, because many were deported for alleged criminal activity, even in the final quarter of last year. But this is really a catch-22, that people put their names into a government database that may ultimately be used to remove them from this country. That's really, really hard to swallow, isn't it? Meanwhile, a private prison company in Texas has written the language in a bill that's been introduced in the state Senate that essentially would enable them to lock up immigrant children in prisons in a manner that is not consistent with current Texas state law. So they want to water down the standards for child care centers for all Texans so that the private prison company Geo Group can put women and children into one of their facilities in Texas. The bill would lower state child care standards for family detention centers, excluding the facilities from regulations such as ones that prohibit housing children and unrelated adults in the same room. So we're going to create some really barbaric gulags in this country, and, of course, companies will profit from this incarceration, and most Americans will be oblivious to it because we already have these gulags set up. We're going to expand them and increase the profiteering. And Geo Group, the lobbyist for whom wrote this legislation, made what appears to be an illegal $225,000 donation to a Trump super PAC last year. The island Commonwealth of Puerto Rico is back in the news, and it's never good news for Puerto Rico because it has a huge debt crisis. It is banned by American law from seeking bankruptcy protection like Detroit or Stockton or other entities have. And so there is some bizarre process that's never been used before. The governor of Puerto Rico has petitioned for relief under Title III of a new federal law for insolvent territorial governments called PROMESA. It contains some bankruptcy provisions and has never been used before, so we don't know how it will play out. But the vultures, the debt vultures from New York who own massive amounts of Puerto Rican debt, are circling, and they are working to enforce their debt collection, regardless of what happens to the people of Puerto Rico. The two white police officers who were responsible for the shooting death of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge last year will not face charges. And the Justice Department, run by Jeff Sessions, announced that before notifying anybody in Baton Rouge, including the prosecutor, the mayor, and the victim's family. Congresswoman Barbara Lee from Oakland, California, said that Sterling had been shot in cold blood and tweeted, "The DOJ's decision not to pursue justice is a travesty." Meanwhile, last weekend's shooting and fatal shooting of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards in a suburb of Dallas has led to the firing of that police officer, who's now been named Roy Oliver. And as you may know, a group of kids were at a rowdy party. The cops came. Jordan and his brothers hopped into a car to leave, and the police apparently lied about the sequence of events initially. But the chief of this suburban police department has taken the right action, first calling it a homicide and now promptly firing that cop. I'm really troubled by this comment attributed to Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic leader and someone who I've known for 30 years. Nancy Pelosi is quoted by Washington Post reporters saying that abortion rights, it's kind of fading as an issue with Democrats, she said. It really is. Now, that's the only quote we have. I don't know the context here. I don't know exactly what else she said. But just taken at face value, I am stunned, shocked, and alarmed. Because the right wing has really gained the upper hand on abortion rights in this country. And to see the Democrats describe it purely in political terms, not moral terms, not legal terms. Oh, it's kind of fading as an issue. Nancy Pelosi, you got some splaining to do. I'd like to hear that. Somebody else is doing some splaining, and that is Janet Napolitano. She came out of Arizona, was governor there. Obama made her Homeland Security cabinet officer. Then she jumped over to the highly paid job as president of the University of California. And following an audit by a legislative analyst, the state auditor, actually, Elaine Howell, Janet Napolitano had to explain how she has squirreled away $175 million in secret budgets that were not revealed to the Board of Regents, the trustees who are ultimately responsible for running the university. Among the audit's findings were that the president's office hid $175 million in undisclosed reserves of restricted and discretionary funds as of June of last year. And Napolitano says, oh, gosh, we just need some of that money for unexpected expenses. But the problem is that she just advocated for and got an increase in tuition and fees at a time when she's got $175 million stashed away. Pretty soon we might be hearing about ex-president of the University of California, Janet Napolitano. Facebook has announced that following the unwanted publicity coming from live videos and other videos that have been uploaded to the social media site that depict violence, rape, suicide, murder, they're going to hire an additional 3,000 people for its community operations team in an effort to be able to identify and block or remove such grisly videos sooner than they have been able to do so far. We'll see how that works out. And to wrap up today, I think we need a little levity, a little political commentary. Here's my friend Will Durst on the Peter B. Collins Podcast.
Hey guys, Will Durst here with a few choice words about Donald Trump's first 100 days. Yeah, it's an artificial benchmark that Trump himself dismissed as a media creation, but it's also one that he earlier insisted would be a yardstick of his incredible, tremendous transitional powers. And it means he only has 1,361 days to go. So, let's see his report card on the first 100, shall we? Mathematics, C-. He kept claiming he had more electoral votes than any other president since Reagan, which is true only if you don't count George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Outside of that, spot on. U.S. history, C-. He seems to prove the old adage that those who ignore history are doomed to retweet it. African American studies, D-. He mocked John Lewis and seems convinced that Frederick Douglass is still alive. Sex education, B+. No discernible activity at all, which after his track record, most folks will appreciate. Health, D-. Who knew healthcare could be so complicated? Everybody? Except you? Again? Social studies, C+. Heavy on the social, light on the studies. Geography, C-. So far he's picked fights with numerous allies, including Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, and Australia. In terms of diplomatic complexity, those aren't the tough ones. Physical education, A+. Getting plenty of exercise on the golf course. Penmanship, A. His signature looks very nice on a continuing series of executive orders. General comments. Does not play well with others. He continues to ignore help when offered and needs to work on his leadership qualities. Outside of that, his overall grade, C-. The good news is there's plenty of room for improvement. For WillDurst.com, I'm Will Durst.
Thank you, Will Durst. It's been a while. Good to have you back on the podcast. This news and comment episode is available every day on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.